Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be reading Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. We're going to be looking at the perception section. So I'm going to share my screen. So this is the perception section of the A consciousness. It starts in page 67, and it starts at aphorism 111, and it goes from page 103 in the PDF to 115. So we're reading from 111 to 132, and then we go next to the force and the understanding, and this is in the Miller edition. So let's get cracking. Perception, or the thing, and deception. Immediate certainty does not take over the truth, for its truth is the universal, whereas certainty wants to apprehend the this. Perception, on the other hand, takes what is present to it as a universal, just as universality is its principle in general. The immediately self-differentiating moments within perception are universal. I is a universal, and the object is a universal. That principle has arisen for us, and therefore the way we take in perception is no longer something that just happens to us like sense certainty. On the contrary, it is logically necessitated. With the emergence of the principle, the two moments, which in their appearing merely occur, also come into being. One being the movement of pointing out, or the act of perceiving, the other being the same movement as a simple event, or the object perceived. In essence, the object is the same as the movement. Movement is the unfolding and differentiation of the two moments, and the object is the apprehending togetherness of the moments. For us, or in itself, the universal as principle is the essence of perception. And in contrast to this abstraction, both the moments distinguished, that which perceives and that which is perceived, are the unessential. But in fact, both, because both are themselves the universal or the essence, both are essential. Yet since they are related to each other as opposites, only one can be the essential moment in the relation, and the distinction of essential and unessential moment must be shared between them. One of them, the object, defined as the simple entity, is the essence regardless of whether it is perceived or not. But the act of perceiving as a movement is the unessential moment, the unstable faction, which can as well be as not be. 112. We might actually do what we did yesterday and go down and find the commentary at the other end. Because sometimes Hegel is, or a lot of the time, Hegel can be hard to understand. So we're on aphorism 111. Here we go, perception. And remember, we're moving from sense certainty and what we've found in sense certainty, what all of these, the assumptions of the apprehension, that there's actually a lot of concepts found in apprehension. And I mean, there's disagreement. I mean, Stern was talking about it yesterday. Epistemic foundationalism, empiricism. I was talking about Kant, and he brought it down to the basic entities, is what Stern said. If I can just bring it up here, let's see now. See what we know. But the main thing that we see in Hegel's approach is that there's a constant development of movement. And I was thinking about this last night. Why is it that Hegel is so concerned about movement? What is it that it shows him? Give me one moment. Okay, I'll look for yeah, here we go. So as you can see, this is the Stern. So what we have is we have a disagreement here between epistemic foundationalism, content empiricism, and realism. Okay, this is according to these three scholars. But then what Stern says, and I think this is really important, is there's a deeper assumption here. This is the assumption that because it does not use concepts, uncertainty is in a position to grasp the thing as an individual without any abstraction from its unique specificity or pure particularity, and that in doing so, sense certainty gives us the most important kind of knowledge, which is of things as concrete singular entities. And they have a one-to-one relation. Okay, so what does perception mean? Immediate certainty's true object is the universal, but it wants to deal with the immediate, this. Perception acknowledges the universal, the general pattern, to be its object. But it does not yet see this to be the essential element of its object. It is we, the phenomenological observer, who see this to be the essential element and the necessary outcome of what has gone before. For perception itself, the essential element is again the object, as in the sense certainty. The object is the essential, constant, independent element, while perception is given as universal, variable, dependent. Perception does not see that subject and object are equally the unessential forms in which a universal pattern is cast. So let's go back to 112. The object must now be defined more precisely, and the definition must be developed briefly from the result that has been reached. The more detailed development does not belong here, since the principle of the object, the universal, is in its simplicity a mediated universal. The object must express this, its nature, in its own self. This it does by showing itself to be the thing with many properties. The wealth of sense knowledge belongs to perception, not to immediate certainty, for which it was only the source of instances. For only perception contains negation, that is, difference or manifoldness, within its own essence. So let's go to 112. The object, however, can only be a universal pattern insofar as it unites many distinct elements, i.e. properties in its pattern. The perceptual object is really given with the interior richness which the object of the senses is only taken to have. Universality is meaningless without specificity. 13. The this is therefore established as not this, or as something superseded, and hence not as nothing, but as a determinate nothing, the nothing of a content vis-a-vis the this. Consequently, the sense element is still present, but not in the way it was supposed to be, in the position of immediate certainty, not as the singular item that is meant, but as a universal, or as that which will be defined as a property. Supersession exhibits its true twofold meaning, which we have seen in the negative. It is at once a negating and a preserving. Our nothing, as the nothing of the this, preserves its immediacy, and is itself sensuous, but it is a universal immediacy. Being, however, is a universal in virtue of its having mediation, or the negative within it. When it expresses this in its immediacy, it is a differentiated determinate property. As a result, many such properties are established simultaneously, one being the negative of another, since they are expressed in the simplicity of the universal. These determinacies, which are properties, strictly speaking, only through the addition of a further determination, are related only to themselves. They are different to one another. Each is on its own and freedom from the others. But the simple self-identical universality is itself in turn distinct and free from these determinate properties it has. It is pure relating of itself to itself, or the medium in which all these determinacies are, and in which, as a simple unity, they therefore interpenetrate, but without coming into contact with one another. For it is precisely through participating in this universality that they exist indifferently on their own account. This abstract universal medium, which can be called simple thinghood or pure essence, is nothing else than what here and now have proved themselves to be, vis-a-vis a simple togetherness of a plurality. But the many are, in their determinateness, simple universal themselves. This salt is a simple here, and at the same time manifold. It is white and also tart, also cubical in shape, of a specific gravity, etc. All these many properties are in a single simple here, in which therefore they interpenetrate. None has a different here from the others, but each is everywhere in the same here in which the others are, and at the same time without being separated by different heres. They do not affect each other in this interpretation. The whiteness does not affect the cubical shape, and neither affects the tart taste. On the contrary, since each is itself a simple relating of itself to itself, it leaves the others alone and is connected with them only by the indifferent also. This also is thus the pure universal itself, or the medium, the thinghood, which holds them together in this way. So that's 113. Let's read 113 here. The thing of perception is sense-given, but its sensuousness is universal, i.e., it appears in the form of a property. Sense is aufgehoben, destroyed yet preserved, in the perceptual thing. But the universality of perception necessarily diremps itself into a number of mutually exclusive properties, which at the same time it brings together. Its structure involves an inherent conflict. From one point of view, it is an absolute unity, that of space, time, region, which brings the properties indifferently together, so that where the one is, the other is also, while from another point of view, it breaks up into the many distinct properties, with each of which can be considered in and for itself. 14. In the relationship which has thus emerged, it is only the character of positive universality that is at first observed and developed. But a further side presents itself, which must also be taken into consideration. To wit, if the many determinate properties were strictly indifferent to one another, if they were simply and solely self-related, they would not be determinate, for they are only determinate insofar as they differentiate themselves from one another, and relate themselves to others as to their opposites. Yet, as thus opposed to one another, they cannot be together in the simple unity of the medium, which is just as essential to them as negation. The differentiation of the properties, insofar as it is not an indifferent differentiation, but is exclusive, each property negating the others, thus falls outside of the simple medium, and the medium therefore is not merely and also an indifferent unity, but a one, as well as a unity which excludes the other. The one is the moment of negation. It is itself quite simply a relation to self, and it excludes another, and it is this by which thinghood is determined as a thing. Negation is inherent in a property as a determinateness which is immediately one with the immediacy of being an immediacy, which through this unity with negation is universality. As a one, However, the determinateness is set free from this unity with its opposite and exists in and for itself. So it is 114 said. The more loose also of a medium points, however, to some more absolute kind of unity which excludes otherness, rigidity from itself. This absolute unity can be attributed to the several properties, or it can be attributed to the thing as such. We have the alternatives, it would seem, of having either a bundle of properties or a metaphysical peg to hang them on, or both. Very uncertain of interpenetration. 115. In these movements taken together, the thing as the truth of perception is completed, so far as it is necessary to develop it here. It is A, an indifferent passive universality, the also of the many properties, or rather matter, B, negation, equally simply, or the one which excludes opposite properties, and C, the many properties themselves, the relation of the first two moments, or negation as it relates to the indifferent element, and therein expands into a host of differences. The point of singular individuality in the medium of subsistence radiating forth into plurality. Insofar as these differences belong to the indifferent medium, they are themselves universal. They are related only to themselves and do not affect one another. But insofar as they belong to the negative unity, they are at the same time exclusive of other properties, but they necessarily have this relationship of opposition to properties remote from there also. The sensuous universality, or the immediate unity of the being and the negative, is thus a property only when the one and the pure universality are developed from it and differentiated from each other. And when the sensuous universality unites them, it is this relation of the universality to the pure essential moments which at last completes the thing. 115. The perceived thing represents a difficult compromise of a set of properties loosely together and supplementing each other in the thing. B, the thing is the space-time location or medium in which the properties are brought together. C, the properties treated as a pure, B, the thing as space and time. Let me read this again. The perceived thing represents a difficult compromise of A, a set of properties loosely together and supplementing each other in the thing. B, the thing as the space-time location or medium in which the properties are brought together. And C, the properties treated as pure universals having a status outside of the particular thing. 16. This then is how the thing of perception is constituted, and consciousness is determined as percipient insofar as this thing is its object. It has only to take it, to confine itself to a pure apprehension of it. And what is thus yielded is the true. If consciousness itself did anything in taking what is given, it would, by such adding or subtraction, alter the truth, since the object is the true and the universal, the self-identical, while consciousness is alterable and unessential. It can happen that consciousness apprehends the object incorrectly and deceives itself. The percipient is aware of the possibility of deception, for in the universality which is the principle, otherness itself is immediately present to him, for him, though present as what is null and superseded. His criterion of truth is therefore self-identity, and his behavior consists in apprehending the object as self-identical. Since at the same time diversity is explicitly there for him, it is a connection of the diverse moments of his apprehension to one another. But if a dissimilarity makes itself felt in the course of this comparison, then this is not an untruth of the object, for this is the self-identical, but an untruth in perceiving it. 116. The dialectic now takes a new turn, the perceptual object being this curious mixture of internal togetherness and apartness. The subject regards it as essential, constant, and self-same. All departures for sich selbst Gleichheit are attributed to the subject, and its illusions are not to be found in the object. 17. Let us see now what consciousness experience in its actual perceiving. For us, this experience is already contained in the development of the object and of the attitude of consciousness towards it given just now. It is only a matter of developing the contradictions that are present therein. The object which I apprehend presents itself purely as a one, but I also perceive in it a property which is universal, and which thereby transcends the singularity. The first being of the objective essence as a one was therefore not its true being, but since the object is what is true, the untruth falls in me. My apprehension was not correct. On account of the universality of the property, I must rather take the objective essence to be on the whole a community. I now perceive the property to be determinate, opposed to another and excluding it. Thus, I did not, in fact, apprehend the objective essence correctly when I defined it as a community with others, or as a continuity, on account of the determinateness of the property. I must break up the continuity and posit the objective essence as a one that excludes. In the broken up one, I find many such properties which do not affect the other, but are mutually indifferent. Therefore, I did not perceive the object correctly when I apprehended it as exclusive. On the contrary, just as previously it was only continuity in general, so now it is a universal common medium in which many properties are present as sensuous universalities, each existing on its own account and as determinate, excluding the others. But this being so, what I perceive as the simple and the true is also not a universal medium, but the single property by itself, which, however, as such, is neither a property nor a determinate being. For now it is neither in a one nor connected with others. Only when it belongs to a one is it a property, and only in relation to others is it determinate. As this pure relating of oneself to itself, it remains merely sensuous being in general, since it no longer possesses the character of negativity, and the consciousness which takes its object to be a sensuous being is only my meaning, mein meinen, i.e., it has ceased altogether to perceive and has withdrawn into itself. But sensuous being and my meaning themselves pass over into perception. I am thrown back to the beginning and draw once again into the same cycle which supersedes itself in each moment as a whole. 117. Consciousness now becomes aware of the contradictions in the object which only we, the phenomenological observers, have seen in it. The object first, and this is a really important passage, the object first presents itself as a pure unity. But the properties are all universal and could not exist outside of it. The unity of the object is therefore my confusion or mistake. And the object is really an association of universals. But in such a loose association, the properties are not effectively brought together so as to exclude one another. The object is therefore again a pure unity, and the properties mere sides of it. But the properties are often mutually indifferent, so that the object's unity again vanishes. The properties now become so wholly detached that they no longer contrast it with anything and no longer are properties. We are back to the blank being of sense certainty. (18) 118. Consciousness therefore necessarily runs through this cycle again, but this time not in the same way as it did the first time. For it is experienced in perception that the outcome of the truth of perception is its dissolution, or its reflection out of the true and into itself. Thus it becomes quite definite for consciousness how its perceiving is essentially constituted, vis-a-vis that it is not a simple pure apprehension, but in its apprehension is at the same time reflected out of the true into itself. This return of consciousness into itself, which is directly mingled with the pure apprehension of the object, for this return into itself has shown itself to be essential to perception, alters the truth. Consciousness at once recognizes this aspect of its own and takes responsibility for it. By doing so, it will obtain the true object in its purity. This being so, we have now, in the case of perception, the same as happened in the case of sense certainty, the aspect of consciousness being driven back into itself, but not in the first instance, in the sense in which this happened in sense certainty, not as if the true of perception fell in consciousness. On the contrary, consciousness recognizes that it is the untruth occurring in perception that falls within it. But by this very recognition, it is able at once to supersede this untruth. It distinguishes its apprehension of the truth from the untruth of its perception, corrects the untruth, and since it undertakes to make this correction itself, the truth, qua truth of perception, falls, of course, within consciousness. The behavior of consciousness, which we have now to consider, is thus so constituted that consciousness no longer merely perceives, but is also conscious of its reflection into itself. It separates this from simple apprehension proper. Okay, so 118. Consciousness now repeats the whole circle somewhat differently. It becomes conscious of the essential untruth of all perception and attributes this untruth to itself, being at the same time made of its power to correct perception and arrive at the naked reality behind perception, which corrected picture it again recognizes as its own. At first, then, I become aware of the thing as a one, and have to hold fast to it in this its true character. If in the course of perceiving it, something turns up which contradicts it, this is to be recognized as a reflection of mine. Now, there also occur in the perception various properties, which seem to be properties of the thing, but the thing is a one, and we are conscious that this diversity, by which it would cease to be a one, falls in us. So, in point of fact, the thing is white only to our eyes, also tart to our tongue, also cubical to our touch, and so on. We get the entire diversity of these aspects, not from the thing, but from ourselves, and they fall asunder in this way for us because the eye is quite distinct from the tongue, and so on. We are thus the universal medium in which such moments are kept apart and exist each on its own, through the fact, then, that we regard the characteristic of being a universal medium as our reflection. We preserve the self-identity and truth of the thing, its being a one. 119. The doctrine of primary and secondary qualities is now developed. The object itself is conceived as profoundly simple, but it is perceived with a variety of properties because it affects various bodily organs. Eye, ear, etc., the conscious ego, now becomes the common medium in which all the thing's sense aspects are brought together. 120. But regarded as existing each for itself in the universal medium, these diverse aspects for which consciousness accepts responsibilities are specifically determined. White is white only in opposition to black, and so on. And the thing is a one precisely by being opposed to others. But it is not as a one that it excludes others from itself. For to be a one is the universal relating of self to self, and the fact that it is a one rather makes it like all the others. It is through its determinateness that the thing excludes others. Things are therefore in and for themselves determinate. They have properties by which they distinguish themselves from others, since the properties is the thing's own eigen property or a determinateness in the thing itself. The thing has a number of properties, for in the first place the thing is what is true, i.e., it possesses intrinsic being, and what is in it is there as the thing's essence, and not on account of other things. Secondly, therefore, the determinate properties do not only exist on account of other things and for other things, but in the thing itself. yet they are determinate properties in it only because they are a plurality of reciprocally self-differentiating elements. And thirdly, since this is how they are in the thinghood, the essence of the one thing of which they are properties, they exist in and for themselves and different to one another. It is in truth, then, the thing itself that is white and also cubical, also tart, and so on. In other words, the thing is the also, or the universal medium in which the many properties subsist apart from one another without touching or cancelling one another. And when so taken, the thing is perceived as what is true. 120. By a new shift in the dialectic, it is made plain that if the thing is conceived as absolutely one, it will no longer possible to distinguish it from other things. All will be wholly blank unities, and so indistinguishable. A thing must be what it is only by having its own properties, these proper and particular to itself. Since each of these properties has its own separate being, the thing again becomes a loose association of properties. It is A, and also B, and also C, etc. 121. Now, in perceiving in this way, consciousness is at the same time aware that it is also reflected into itself, and that in perceiving the opposite moment, to the also turns up. But this moment is the unity of the thing with itself, a unity which excludes difference from itself. Accordingly, it is this unity which consciousness has to take upon itself, for the thing itself is the subsistence of the many diverse and independent properties. Thus we say of the thing, it is white, also cubical, also tart, and so on. But in so far as it is white, it is not cubical, and in so far as it is cubical and also white, it is not tart, and so on. Positing these properties as a oneness is the work of consciousness alone, which therefore has to prevent them from collapsing into oneness in the thing. To this end, it brings in the insofar, in this way preserving the properties as mutually external, and the thing as the also. Quite rightly, consciousness makes itself responsible for the oneness, at first in such a way that what was called a property is represented as a free matter. The thing is in this way raised to the level of a genuine also, since it becomes a collection of matters and instead of being a one, becomes merely an enclosing surface. 121. Consciousness now, instead of attributing the plurality of the thing's properties to itself and making the thing intrinsically one, makes the thing intrinsically an assemblage of properties, of free matters. The physics of Hegel's day spoke of electrical, calorific, chromatic matters, while the object's unity is a sort of fiction for which consciousness alone is responsible. 122. If we look back on what consciousness previously took and now takes responsibility for, on what it previously ascribed and now ascribes to the thing, we see that consciousness alternatively makes itself as well as the thing into both a pure many less one and into one also that resolves itself into independent matters. So this is a really important paragraph here. If we look back on what consciousness previously took and now takes responsibility for, on what it previously ascribed and now ascribes to the thing, we see that consciousness alternatively makes itself as well as the thing into both a pure many one and also into also that resolves itself into independent matters. Consciousness thus finds through this comparison that not only its truthful perceiving, Nehmen des Wahren, contains the distinct moments of apprehension and withdrawal into itself, but rather that the truth itself, the thing, reveals itself in this twofold way. Our experience then is this, that the thing exhibits itself for the consciousness apprehending it in a specific manner, but at the same time reflected out of the way in which it presents itself to consciousness and back into itself. In other words, it contains its own self, an opposite truth to that which it has for the apprehending consciousness. 122. Consciousness now gets tired of attributing such diverse errors to itself and simply recognizes that the thing in itself, as reflected into itself, has this diversity of opposing aspects in it. It at one moment shows itself as a profound unity, and another moment as a loose assemblage of properties. 123. Thus consciousness has got beyond this second type of attitude in perceiving it too, i.e. the one in which it takes the thing as truly self-identical and itself for what is not self-identical, but returns back into itself out of identity. The object is now for consciousness this whole movement, which was previously shared between the object and consciousness. The thing is a one, reflected into itself. It is for itself, but it is also for another. And moreover, it is another on its own account, just because it is for another. Accordingly, the thing is for itself and also for another, a being that is doubly differentiated by also a one. But the oneness contradicts this diversity. Hence, consciousness would again have to assume responsibility for placing the diversity in the one and for keeping it away from the thing. It would have to say that insofar as it is for itself, the thing is not for another. But the oneness also belongs to the thing itself as consciousness has found by experience. The thing is essentially reflected into itself. The also or the indifferent difference thus falls as much within the thing as it does within the oneness. But since the two are different, they do not fall within the same thing, but in different things. The contradiction which is present in the objective essence as a whole is distributed between two objects. In and for itself, the thing is self-identical, but this unity with itself is disturbed by the other thing. Thus the unity of the thing is preserved, and at the same time the otherness is preserved outside of the thing as well as outside of consciousness. 1, 2, 3. Consciousness no longer attributes the object's oscillation between profound unity and directed multiplicity to consciousness, but to the object. But a new device occurs to it. The object is put forth as profoundly one, while its diversity of aspects are due to its relations, not with consciousness, but with other objects, which, as it were, call forth different responses from it. 1, 2, 4. Now, although it is true that the contradiction in the objective essence is in this way distributed among different things, yet the difference will, for that reason, attach to the singular separated thing itself. The different things are thus established as existing on their own account, and the conflict between them is, so far, reciprocal, that each is different, not from itself, but only from the other. But each is thereby determined as being itself a different thing, and it has its essential difference in its own self. But all the while, not as if this difference were an opposition in the thing itself. On the contrary, for itself, it is a simple determinateness which constitutes the thing's essential character and differentiates itself from others. As a matter of fact, since differentness is present in it, it is, of course, necessarily present as in actual difference, manifoldly constituted. But because the determinateness constitutes the essence of the thing, by which it distinguishes itself from other things and is for itself, this further manifold constitution is the unessential aspect. Consequently, the thing does indeed have the twofold insofar with its unity, but the aspects are unequal in value. As a result, this state of opposition does not develop into an actual opposition in the thing itself, but insofar as the thing, through its absolute difference, comes into a state of opposition, it is opposed to another thing outside of it. Of course, the further manifoldness is necessarily present in the thing too, so that it cannot be left out. But it is the unessential aspect of the thing. 1, 2, 4. It seems absurd, however, that things without intrinsic differences should be coaxed into showing difference by their mere relations with other things, without intrinsic difference. We are therefore forced to postulate an internal distinctiveness, which is essential to the object, and an external diversity from other objects, which is an unessential consequence of this. It is because things are intrinsically distinctive that they are also extrinsically diverse. The determinateness which constitute the essential character of the thing and distinguish it from all others is now defined in such a way that the thing is thereby in opposition to other things, but is supposed to preserve its independence in this opposition. But it is only a thing, or a one that exists on its own account, insofar as it does not stand in this relation to others. For this relation establishes rather its continuity with others, and for it to be connected with others is to cease to exist on its own account. It is just through the absolute character of the thing and its opposition that it relates itself to others, and is essentially only this relating. The relation, however, is the negation of its self-subsistence, and it is really the essential property of the thing that it is undoing. So we read 125. So 125. We are, however, unable to distinguish. Let me read 124 again. It seems absurd, however, that things without intrinsic difference should be coaxed into showing difference by their mere relations to one another. Things without intrinsic difference. We are therefore forced to postulate an internal distinctiveness, Unterschied, which is essential to the object and an external diversity from other objects, which is an unessential consequence of this. It is because things are intrinsically distinctive that they are also extrinsically diverse. 125. We are, however, unable to distinguish this internal distinctiveness from the external diversity. The thing's absolute character seems the same as its relatedness to other things and vice versa. Okay, 126. The conceptual necessity of the experience through which consciousness discovers that the thing is demolished by the very determinateness that constitutes its essence and its being for self can be summarized as follows. The thing is posited as being for itself, or as the absolute negation of all otherness, therefore is purely self-related negation. But the negation that is self-related is the suspension of itself. In other words, the thing has its essential being in another thing. Same point restated. The thing's absolute self-relation, which negates all otherness, also shows up as being no more than thoroughgoing relation to others. 127. In fact, the definition of the object, as it has emerged, has shown itself to contain nothing else. The object is defined as having within it an essential property which constitutes its simple being for self, but along with the simple nature, the object is also to contain diversity, which, though necessary, is not to constitute its essential determinateness. This, however, is a distinction that is still only nominal. The unessential, which is none the less supposed to be necessary, cancels itself out. It is what has just been called the negation of itself. Same point. The extrinsic, which is nonetheless quite necessary, is really intrinsic. 128. With this, the last insofar that separated being for self from being for another falls away. On the contrary, the object is, in one and the same respect, the opposite of itself. It is for itself, so far as it is for another, and it is for another, so far as it is for itself. It is for itself reflected into itself, a one. This for itself, this reflection into itself, this being a one, is posited in a unity with its opposite, with its being for another, and hence only is cancelled. In other words, this being for self is just an unessential as the only aspect that was supposed to be unessential vis-a-vis the relationship to another. We cannot draw subtle distinctions, 128. We cannot draw subtle distinctions between the object as it intrinsically is, and the object as it is in relation to another things. The former is the latter, and the latter the former. We have a distinction without a difference, i.e., a merely intended verbal distinction. 129. Thus, the object in its pure determinateness, or in the determinateness which were supposed to constitute its essential being, is overcome just as purely as it was in its sensuous being. From a sensuous being, it turned into a universal. But this universal, since it originates in the sensuous, is essentially conditioned by it, and hence is not truly a self-identical universality at all, but one afflicted with an opposition. For this reason, the universality splits into the extremes of singular individuality and universality, into the one of the properties and the also of the free matters. These pure determinateness seems to express the essential nature itself, but they are only a being for self, that is burdened with a being for another. Since, however, both are essential in the single unity, what we now have is unconditioned absolute universality, and consciousness here for the first time truly enter the realm of the understanding. The thing is therefore essentially overcome as it was previously overcome on its sensuous side. The latter revealed itself as pure universality, but as a universality infected with several conflicts. That the universal and the individual, that of the unity of the properties in the thing and their isolation as free matters, that of being intrinsically this or that, and that of being something only in relation to other things. The nature of the thing is therefore simply the nature of the understanding which constitutes it, and in which all these tensions are always present. Okay, so we've got two more. 130. Thus the singular being of sense does indeed vanish in the dialectical movement of immediate certainty and becomes universality, but it is only a sensuous universality. My meaning has vanished, and perception takes the object as it is in itself, or as a universal as such. Singular being therefore emerges in the object as true singleness, as the in itself of the one, or as a reflectedness into self. But this is still a conditioned being for self, alongside which appears another being for self, the universality which is opposed to and conditioned by singular being. But these two contradictory extremes are not merely alongside each other, but in a single unity, or in other words, the defining characteristic common to both. Vis-a-vis being for self is burdened with opposition, generally, i.e., it is at the same time not a being for self. The sophistry of perception seeks to save these moments from their contradiction, and it seeks to lay hold on the truth by distinguishing between the aspects, by sticking to the also and to the insofar, and finally by distinguishing the unessential aspect from an essence which is opposed to it. But these expedients, instead of warding off perception in the process of apprehension, prove themselves, on the contrary, to be quite empty, and the truth which is supposed to be won by this logic of the perceptual process proves to be in one and the same respect the opposite of itself, and thus to have as its essence a universality which is devoid of distinctions and determinations. 130. The sophistry of perception tries to save itself by a device of aspects, and insofar as it talks of the perceived object insofar as it is one object, insofar as its many properties, insofar as it has self-existence, insofar as it is related to other things. This sort of device must be abandoned. It is the pure universality of the begriff, of the concept, of the notion, which emerges, which evolves in inseparable union, the universal, the specific, and the singular, the separate and the interrelated. The empty abstractions of the singleness and the universality opposed to it, and of an essence that is linked with something unessential, is non-essential aspect, which is necessary all the same. These powers, whose interplay is the perceptual understanding, often called sound common sense, the sound common sense which takes itself to be solid, realistic consciousness, is in the perceptual process only the play of these abstractions. Generally, it is always at its poorest when it fancies itself to be the richest, bandied about by these vacuous essences, thrown into the arms, first of the one and then of the other, and striving by its sophistry to hold fast and affirm alternately first one of the essences and then the directly opposite one. It sets itself against the truth and holds the opinion that philosophy is concerned only with mental entities. As a matter of fact, philosophy does have to do with them too, recognizing them as pure essences, the absolute elements and powers, but in doing so recognizes them in their specific determinateness as well, and is therefore master over them. Whereas perceptual understanding, or sound common sense, takes them for the truth and is led on by them for one error to another. It does not itself become conscious that it is simple essentialities of this kind that hold sway over it, but fancies that it has always to do with wholly substantial material and content, just as sense certainty is unaware that the empty abstraction of pure being is its essence, but it is, in fact, these essentialities, within which perceptual understanding runs to and fro every kind of material and content. They are the cohesive power and mastery over that content, and they alone are what the sensuous is as essence for consciousness. They are what determines the relations of the sensuous to it, and it is then that the process of perception and its truth runs its course. This course, a perceptual alternation of determining what is true and then setting aside this determining, constitutes, strictly speaking, the steady everyday life and activity of perceptual consciousness, a consciousness which fancies itself to be moving in the realm of truth. It advances uninterruptedly to the outcome in which all these essentialities or determinations are equally set aside, but in each single moment it is conscious only of this one determinateness as the truth, and then in turn of the opposite one. It does indeed suspect their unessentialities, and to save them from the danger threatening them, it resorts to the sophistry of asserting to be true what it has itself just declared to be untrue. What the nature of these untrue essences is really trying to get understanding to do is to bring together and thereby supersede the thoughts of those non-entities, the thoughts of that universality and singularity being of also and one, of the unessentiality that is necessarily linked to the unessential moment of an unessential moment that yet is necessary. But the understanding struggles to avoid doing this by resorting to insofar as and to the various aspects, or by making itself responsible for one thought in order to keep the other one isolated as the true one. But the very nature of these abstractions bring them together of their own accord. It is sound common sense that is the prey of these abstractions, which spin it around and around in their whirling circle, when common sense tries to make them true by at one time making itself responsible for their untruth, while another time it calls their deceptiveness a sensible semblance of the unreliability of things, and separates what is essential from what is necessary to them yet supposedly unessential, holding the former to be their truth as against the latter. When it does this, it does not secure them their truth, but convinces itself of untruth. 131. Perceptual understanding is dominated by the empty abstraction of individuality and universality, of the essential and the unessential. It despises philosophy for concerning itself with Gedankendig, but in effect deals with nothing else itself, and merely oscillates from one crude abstract thought to another. If it could realize that it is dealing with thoughts, concepts, it would be their master and shape them as it wills. But it imagines that it is dealing with real matter, substance, etc. In its vain wanderings, the perceptual understanding fails to arrive at the truth of things through its plainly revealed its own untruth. So that is, we've just read the perception section of Hegel's Phenomenology, and next we're going to be reading the force and the understanding. And the force and the understanding goes from 132. Let's see how long it is in the notes at the end of the book. 132, yeah, it seems to be pretty long. 265. And then we get the truth of self-certainty. Well, then we get the birth, I think, of the truth of self-certainty, or the birth of self-consciousness, I presume. If we'll go have a look at the contents. But yeah, sense certainty or force and understanding looks reasonably big. So that's the preface. We've read sense certainty. We've read perception. So yeah, 67 to 79. And then the truth of self-consciousness is the truth of self-certainty. Very good. We're making good progress. And I'll be reading some more H.S. Harris and other stuff coming up. Okay, take care.